Right? And what I'm suggesting to you is the choice to feel an emotion is actually a will-based choice. It's not a magical process. So that's going to require a switch in you, isn't it? An attitude switch internally towards allowing yourself to desire emotion and to feel it. That makes sense, doesn't it? An attitude switch is going to have to happen. Paul, you wanted to ask.
To me, it seems like a discipline with other things which I've done, and for myself, it seems like. Is that how you have experienced it?
No, I feel this is where see how you've learned intellectually does not have a bearing on how you'll feel your emotions. The process of learning intellectually is often a disciplined process. You are given material, you study it, you take the effort and time to study it, you remember it. It's a process of an intellectual process of discipline. I agree. But that's not the process of soul-based awareness. The process of soul-based awareness is a process of surrender.
I guess I'm talking around fear and I guess for myself,
I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want it to be discipline, Paul, and the majority do. The majority want the process, the soul-based process, to be the same as the intellectual process that they've learned over years, right? Because it's easier, so you think. But you haven't tried the soul-based process to know if it's easier. You just think it's going to be easier. But the surrender process, which is the real process, right, which is a process of becoming humble, truly humble, that process requires emotion. The discipline process does not require emotion. It requires what I would classify as willpower. Does that make sense? Whereas this process requires will. Very, very different processes. This process needs will. This process, you use willpower. This process is surrender to emotion. This process doesn't worry about emotion. You don't have to worry about emotion there. You just have to remember things. Right? This process requires going through pain. This process allows you to avoid pain.
See, with going into fear, and for me, putting the time and stuff, and I'm frequently in the middle of the night, up feeling fear.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get some relief and I feel like I've gone through some, and then I can go back to sleep and have some peace. And other times I don't feel like I can get to that point. But that to me is something, you see, or I can just lie in bed and thinking, I just wish I could just go to sleep. But to me it seems, and sometimes I liken it to...
But can I suggest to you, Paul, you don't want to surrender to anger, and you've got quite a lot of it to feel. You don't want to feel it, right? And you definitely don't like surrendering to grief, right? And you definitely don't like surrendering to shame. And I could probably list another 10 or 15 emotions that I know you don't like feeling. Now, while your will is exercised in trying to shut those emotions down, will surrender ever occur? No matter how much you get up in the middle of the night and just try to feel. So I suggest you're using your willpower.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your will isn't set yet because you've not let go of the reasons why you don't want to do it. Can everyone see that? It's like, for most of you, you're yet to let go of the reasons why you don't want to do it. You think you want to do it, so you're going to force yourself to do it. Does that make sense to you? This is what you're doing. You think you want to do it, so you're going to force yourself to do it. Whereas my focus has been, why don't I want to do it? Because it'll happen naturally if I want to do it. The fear will come up naturally, as it did for myself, when I wanted to do it. When in my emotions, I wanted to do it. That's when it came up. Didn't come up before then. I was in complete denial of it for years and years and years. Now, and you can't force yourself to do it. You have to want to do it. And that's about developing the aspiration and working through all the reasons why you don't want to do it. And that's what I see the majority of you don't want to do. You don't want to work through the don't want to. Does that make sense? You're telling yourself you want to, but you don't want to. And you're better off feeling why you don't want to, because every feeling that you have that you don't want to will get released if you feel it, and the less feelings of don't want to that are in you will cause you to eventually do it. Do you see? So it's sort of like the way I see it for the majority of you, and this is how I see it for yourself, Paul, is that you sort of, if you imagine this is a container, and this is your don't want to container. Don't do it. That's your don't do it container, okay? Other way around. That's your don't do it container. And your don't do it container is full of different emotions that just say don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Right? Now, while the don't do it container is full, and the do it container is quite low, you've got a bit of faith, that's good. You feel like you've learnt enough about the truth now to think you want to do it, so your thoughts, so you've got some faith, but it's not strong enough yet to overcome the don't do it, and you've got some thoughts about doing it, but still not strong enough to overcome don't do it. Can you see it's not going to happen? The only way it's going to happen, isn't it, is that if each of these don't do it emotions start to get released, while at the same time you build this with other things, truth, action, and so forth, right? Now, can you see, for the majority of you, you've been trying to build that while at the same time holding on to this and not releasing it. And that's what you've been doing, Paul. You try to build this, what you call the positives of life, that will get you to do something, while at the same time, so these are emotions. I'm not saying many of these are emotional, because your faith is emotional. So you have some faith and it's emotional. But those emotions are still not powerful enough to overcome the don't do it emotions, because you've yet to release the don't do it emotions. The more of these that you release, can you see that once this level here, the don't do it level, gets below the do it level, what's going to happen? You'll do it. That make sense? Yeah. You'll do it. Your desire now to do it is greater than your fear of not doing it. You could say this scale here is your fear level, couldn't you? And you could say this scale here is your desire level.
Yeah, another thing with the fear level thing, because I sort of tell myself that I'm processing fear throughout the day, whereas the truth might be more that I'm living in my fear. And how have you known the difference in that? Is that the same desire? And
I've already described that a couple of days ago when I talked about I was just completely locked up, passing out, breathing deeply for hours at a time. But I couldn't work during the day while I'm in that state.
I guess I'm just talking about in every day, like being connected to how I feel around people and stuff like that.
No, I'm talking about the same thing as you. See, this is the thing, is that we're talking about the same thing, but you don't think we are. And the reason why you don't think we are is because you sort of, and I feel most people have this idea, is like, what? AJ's telling me that I'm probably going to be in bed in a contorted state for hours at a time, and then I'll be feeling my fear. And that's exactly what I'm telling you. And you don't want to hear that. What you want to hear is, I can walk around working and I'll feel a little bad, but I'll be right, and I'll be feeling my fear. That's what you want to hear. And that's not what it's like. Like if I'm feeling my sadness, I can't work. I can't do anything. I can't eat. I can't do anything. It's just I'm crying. And I'm crying. Sometimes I cry 6 hours straight. I'm crying. I can't do anything else. Right? So people walk around, they go, oh, I'm really feeling my sadness today. I go, what? Like I'm bedridden feeling my sadness and you're walking around still working and you're telling me you're feeling your sadness? Definitely not. You're in your sadness. You're probably living in your sadness that day. Definitely not releasing it. To release it, you're going to go through a cathartic emotional process. You follow? And most of you have a terrible terror of that process. You don't want to touch that. So when I say to you, like, how are you going to cope with your life? Some of you have jobs, right? Most of you probably have jobs, right? And how are you going to cope with your life if all of a sudden you start processing terror and all of a sudden you're flopping around on the ground in your job? Well, you know, when you think back to the Robert James Lee's book again, where we talked about the harvest of jealousy, she told a story, she started connecting emotionally, bang, she passes out. She's laying on the ground, passed out. When you're really feeling stuff, this is how you're going to be. And what does the world think of that? Good luck with that in front of a whole group of people. What will happen? Not only will you get fired, you get taken to a hospital or a psychiatric ward, right? You will, if you did it there. And this is why you don't do it. It's one of the reasons. Because you know that the whole world's going to have a meltdown around you if you do it in front of them. And this is why I recommend to you that you don't do it in front of anyone. But that means you're going to have a lot of alone time, doesn't it? And you're going to let yourself get to the stage where you can feel this kind of intensity of emotion alone. And without stressing out that you're going to die, and without stressing out that, you know, that someone's going to cart you away into an asylum and so forth. That's why most of you are not doing it. You follow? So yeah, I feel the don't do it emotions are still driving the majority of people. They are developing some desire. So many of you are developing some desire. But the desire still isn't intense enough to overcome the don't do it emotions. So these emotions are the level of these are going to have to drop, aren't they? You're going to have to process some emotion in order to get to the stage where your desire overcomes your fear. The desire has to overcome your fear before you'll do it. All right? And I'm saying to you that every single person, every single one of you that has some grief about something, you will cry for hours on end. Now, about that one thing, you will. Now, you think of all the people in your life right now and how they're going to react to that. I don't know too many people who are not going to react badly, huh? And you know that. That's why you haven't done it. One of the reasons. Yeah. Yeah. Does that help, Paul?
Oh, for sure. You know, one thing I have to watch, see, because in my mind I think that you've gone hard, but not hard in a disciplined way. And
no,
that's
I've surrendered.
Yeah.
Surrendered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every day I remind myself to be humble. And by that I mean every day I remind myself, whatever emotion I'm feeling, I need to surrender to it. I need to surrender to it. I need to just allow it to come up. I need to have the time, the energy for it to come up. I need to have the time, the circumstances for it to come up. And you know that if you're working full time, you're probably going to have to restructure your workload. You probably are, in order to allow emotion to come up, to choose to allow it to come up. Do you know what I mean? You're going to have to, years and years ago I talked about creating a soul space for your own development. That's what I meant. You're going to have to allow it to occur. You're going to have to get a job where you can do it, where you can do 2 or 3 days a week where you're allowed to feel what you feel. That's what you're going to have to do. And that's all a part of it. That's all a part of getting to the stage where you really want to do it. But I suggest to you that if you don't let go of the emotion saying, I don't want to, then no matter, you're going to have to build this to intense, aren't you, before you will overcome those emotions. And you can see that the majority of people build this up, but they don't get it built enough before they just spit the dummy. You know, and I suppose I should explain that for overseas people. Spitting the dummy means I give up. And I say, and I'm angry, and I give up, and I just say, no, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. Want to come down to Kel?
I didn't flop on the floor this morning, but I feel like I had a bit of a process around this where I was angry and I was just feeling where I've judged myself for feeling angry, because all my life I've been very angry and in a rage, you know, and that's how I've responded to everything.
Yeah.
And so I've been in a lot of judgment about myself for being angry. And so as soon as I started to feel and want to feel why I was feeling angry, straight away I started to get emotional about how I felt for being angry all my life and feeling humiliated every time I got angry, and so I had it, you know. You're allowed to get angry. Yeah.
Just don't sin when you're angry.
Yeah. Well, that's a bit late, but anyway,
but
so it was good.
Do you see what I'm saying when I mean don't sin? Don't choose to do further harm while you're angry.
Yes.
You need to let yourself be angry, because you are going to get angry. You guys are going to get angry.
Yeah.
You're going to get angry with God, angry with me, angry with your partner, angry with whomever tells you should feel something.
Yeah.
You're just going to get angry. You need to go through this anger, because it's a part of breaking down some of the addictions that you have. And you get to the stage where you realise, actually, the reason why I'm really angry is because I don't want to do it God's way. I don't want to have to do it emotionally. Why don't we want to have to do it emotionally? Most of the time, the reason why we don't want to have to do it emotionally is because we're afraid of what everybody else will do with us when we do it emotionally. So it's actually about fear, a lot of our anger.
Yeah.
That fear that we just don't want to feel. But you see, you have to go through that to know what it is. Yeah. So let yourself be angry, don't sin. Be angry, and honestly, you might pay to have a little smashing thing outside, just that you can just go berserk, getting angry, just really connect with it. Because what I find generally, if you really connect with your anger, within 30 to 60 seconds, it's usually turns into some tears.
Yeah.
And then you start feeling afraid of, the fear that's there. Yeah. Dave, thanks.
You mentioned earlier about how when we first met you, there was some sort of awareness that all this was taking place or wasn't quite right. Does that then mean that we had some qualities of faith, truth, action and humility, probably more seeking truth perhaps?
Seeking truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, can we use what we had or perhaps still have and build on that?
You still are. You're still using it, Dave. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. So you're still using the seeking of truth as a motivation to be here. The problem is that you've also got to seek humility. And that is a very, very different kettle of fish for most of us, seeking humility. Because humility, remember, is the desire and to experience all of our emotions, whether they're positive or negative, whether they're hard or not hard to experience, whether they're pleasurable or painful. And for the majority of us, we still haven't developed humility in that regard. We're still fighting our emotions, trying to deny them, trying to suppress them, trying to keep control of them and so forth. And this is what we do need to, that's why I say it's a process of surrender, not a process of discipline. Because you have to learn how to surrender to emotion. It's like, you could call it softening to emotion if you want to call it that, but to me, it's a lot more than that. It's about being emotionally connected at every single moment, allowing the connection to be there in its full power and capacity. So if that means you're feeling a negative emotion, a painful emotion, then you'll allow that be there in its full capacity. And for the majority of you, you're terrified of that. And not even just terrified of it for your own capacity to feel it, but a lot of you are terrified of it because of what everyone else will think about it, and what they'll say about it, what they'll do about it, and how they react to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask as well?
Sure you can.
So in a sense, like the surrender is opposite of what we tend to do, and what the intellect generally does is doing.
Yeah. Many of you are still trying to willpower your way into a disciplinary sort of a process that's going to eventually get you to an emotion. And what I'm suggesting is that it's not going to get you to an emotion. The way you get to an emotion is by surrendering to the process, by accepting where you're at, and then starting to allow yourself to feel about where you're at in a truthful manner, and to feel it and experience it emotionally. That's the surrender process, which is a completely different process. And the way you've learnt in the past, the intellectual way you've learnt in the past, all of you have been taught that we've been taught that for millennia, that way of learning on the planet. It's inbuilt in us to teach other people that way. But the reality is it's not a part of our soul. It's just it's the error that's been propagated over and over again. Yeah. So it's a surrender process, and the surrender process is probably what I'd like to talk to you about now. So these are some recommendations I'd like to make to you in this discussion. And I'm going back to some very things I've said before, but I just want to make sure that you get what I'm saying to you. The first thing I'd recommend to you, global emotion. There's two global emotions you need to focus on, right? First global emotion is faith. Faith. Without faith, you will not do this. You will not. So how do you develop faith? The way you develop faith is by finding out more about God, and more about God's truth, and more about God's goodness, and more about God's laws. That's how you develop faith. But once you've found out, the key is to put it into practice. Then you'll have some faith. See, it's one thing to talk about it, quite another to put it into practice in your life, because when you put it into practice, that's when you really have faith. That's when you really know it's going to work. Do you follow me? So what you need to do is allow yourself to experiment with some of God's laws to prove to yourself the truth of them. Like the law of cause and effect, the law of attraction. These laws that you know basic things about already, put them into practice and see whether they are true or not. This will help you build your faith in God and God's goodness. Does that make sense? Allow yourself to develop your faith through a process. It's going to take you doing something, not just talking about it. To do this, to develop faith, you're going to have to do something and then measure its results. So it's like undertaking a series of experiments. Like like I was brought up in the first century in an environment where basically the concept of God was very simple, and it's pretty much the same as the concept of God now, interestingly enough. And that is that God is just a punishing God, and what you've got to do is you've got to do whatever you can to make God not punish you. That was the concept of God. Now, the only thing that caused me to have a different concept of God was me experimenting with some opposite ideas, that maybe God's good. Does that make sense? And what happens if I stop giving God all those things my mum and dad want me to give God? So what happens if I don't do a sacrifice? In the first century we had to sacrifice a lamb and eat the lamb. Passover, we had to eat the lamb as a part of the acknowledgement of God and so forth, and the knowledge of God's angel protecting us. And I chose to not eat the lamb. What do you think the family felt about that? So, this was like my dad and me just major problem about that one issue, But I chose to not eat the lamb. You know why I chose? Because I thought that eating meat, I had to stop eating meat. I went to the temple when I was 13. We've just come back from Egypt back to Nazareth, where we finished up living. And my father went to Jerusalem, one of the very first things he did at Passover time. And we I went to the temple, and there's all this blood running down the sides of the temple. It's terrible. It smelt to high heaven, as you can imagine, all these animals getting slaughtered. It just smelt like a slaughterhouse. And the pain of the animals, just like screaming and whatever, carry on. And after seeing that, that was it for me. I couldn't eat meat anymore. So come Passover, which was the reason why we were there, I'm not eating the Passover meal. My father is just saying how I was going to get punished, and it was a wicked thing I was doing, and it went on, you know. And at the end of the day, was I punished? No, I wasn't. So that helped me see that actually the only person that was punishing me was my father, right? Not God. God wasn't punishing me. So that helped me see I can not sacrifice meat and not eat meat and not eat the Passover meal even, something which was built inside of the Jewish way of life at the time. And God didn't punish me. What else wouldn't God punish? Try a few other things that was the standard way of living and see what else would happen. You see, you've got to do the experiments. And once you've done the experiments, you have your faith starts developing. You say, no, that's not true. So then I could have these arguments with people. I say, sorry, that's not true. I haven't eaten the Passover meal for 20 years. And the only person that's ever harmed me for it were people on earth. God never did, you know. So you start experimenting. You start experimenting with God's goodness, experimenting with God's laws, experimenting with the different things that you need to learn about. This builds your faith. Once you built some faith, and you know, I used to experiment with John, my cousin John the Baptist, and he was a medium, you know, right from a young age. He was like some of the kids you see nowadays, you know, who talk to spirits all the time. He was like that when he was little. Everybody thought he was a bit nutters, but I could see him talking to the spirit, so I didn't see he was nutters. So we used to get together and we used to sit down and we used to talk to all these different kinds of spirits to work out what they were saying. We'd ask them about this and ask them about that and look at their condition. It was wonderful. In the process, I learned that, you know, that most of the people who were punishing other people on earth were spirits in the spirit world, you know, who people thought were God. You know, so I learned a lot about that. So it's through experimentation. Do you see? You need to experiment to develop faith, but faith needs to be developed. The next global quality, humility. Remember, humility is all about emotion. Right? Not quite all about emotion, but to a large extent it's about the willingness to feel and experience all of your emotions. So that's the next quality. It's a personal quality. Only you can develop these things. So you know, the key is to, again, do the same thing. You develop humility through an experience, and that is softening to emotion, working through, allowing yourself to feel. Now, the average person on this planet's not going to let you do that. They're not. You can be in front of them crying and they'll be doing all sorts of things to stop you, right? Unless you've gone to a psychologist and you're sitting down in a chair or something. And then it's okay. To a point. Yeah, to a point. To a point. You know, but the rest of the time it's not okay. And when somebody attacks you, the average response on the planet is anger, is it not? You try crying instead when somebody attacks you. It's just an experiment, isn't it? Try crying instead, see what happens. You'll find some interesting things about people if you do that. But that softening, see, the average person when they're attacked wants to attack in return. That's not humble. Softening to how you feel is humble. Allow yourself to feel how you feel is humble. Right? So you'll need these qualities if you're going to deconstruct the facade. If you're going to settle with getting into these emotional process where you're willing to feel these things, you'll need to develop these qualities. These are positive qualities. They're global emotions that will affect your development. You can see two of them relate to emotion and faith, which we've already discussed in the first group, and we're discussing again now. Very important qualities. Right? You can see that truth is also a desire for truth is an essential quality, isn't it? Global thing that you can develop. I want to know the truth. I want to know the truth. I don't know the truth. I want to know it. I want to know it, no matter what. I want to know it about myself. About myself, I want to know it. Yeah. So we develop humility, we develop faith, we develop these global emotions, and then there's a negative global emotion that we're working towards here, isn't there? And the negative global emotion is being able to get to the stage where we're sensitive to and able to feel terror without running away from it. Because that's the don't do it scale. You see, the don't do it scale is all about terror. We want to reduce our terror while at the same time increasing our desire. So we want to do that. So that our desire, on this hand, gets to the stage where it overcomes any fears. And as a result of our desire overcoming our fears, now we act. And we act naturally. And once you get to that stage, you'll feel emotion naturally. You will. You won't do it necessarily in every situation, because the situation you're in may actually be dangerous to feel your emotion. So, for example, if I'm with a group of people I don't know, and with a group of people like yourselves who panic a bit when it comes to emotion, I wouldn't feel all of my emotion with you. Do you know why? Half of you want to send me to a doctor to fix me up. I don't want to go to a doctor to fix me up. Right? Some of you have tried feeling emotion in a public place and you've ended up in an ambulance. Yeah. Well, that's why. Right? Now, you've got to question why you wanted to feel the emotion in the public place. Don't talk without the mic. It didn't start off public. But you've got to question, like, why even try to do it? You've got to go away under those circumstances to do it. So you don't force it on other people or anything. You just allow yourself to go through the process. Yep. But yeah, they'll call an ambulance and send you off to a psych ward. Not a problem at all. That's why you don't want to do it. Isn't it? Partly. The worry that you're going to go crazy. The worry that you'll be certifiable, just like Jesus is. Yeah, like I get plenty of emails telling me where I belong. I'm pretty sure if I felt my emotions in front of those people, I'd know where they're not too. All right. So what I'm recommending to you and if you read through the recommendations we've put in this section, there's quite a number of more recommendations I've made. But you can see that unless we choose to change the way we handle emotion, things are not really going to change. And that process is not a magical process. It's not going to happen without your will being involved, not your willpower, your will. So there's going to have to develop an aspiration to get to the stage where you want to feel some of this emotion that's inside of you, right? Now, in my case, I had to lose everything and be completely alone before that happened. I lost everything because God's laws deconstruct all of the facade, right? So in the end, once I allowed that to happen, I lost everything. The second thing that happened was I had to allow my emotion to happen. I had to want it even. So I had to get to that stage. So yeah, that's going to probably happen with you, where you get to that stage. Now, you're fortunate because there's other people around you who are okay with you doing that. Some of you are even in a relationship where your partner's okay with that. So the likelihood of you losing everything is far less. It's probably not going to happen under those circumstances for some of you. If you do it with a pure desire, you'll find you won't lose much at all. But I found it very hard to develop a pure desire until I lost everything. You know? Yeah. Once that started, you're in business now. You're in business now. And you'll know you're in business too. You will. I've met a few people around the world, just a few, who are actually doing that. Most of them are young. Most of them are in their 20s. And they know they've dealt with stuff. They don't ask me questions like you ask me. They don't. They know what to do, know how to deal with it. Sometimes we have discussions about their emotions and what's blocking them and so forth, but they're pretty confident. They know what to do and how to do it because they've actually started. There's less terror in them about this because it released some. They've actually gone through a surrender process that we talked about just now. They're quite humble people, very humble people, actually. And as a result, they're making progress. Interestingly enough, they're also people who act. They also finish up creating things related to divine truth that help other people automatically. They've done this after just a few months and sometimes, or a year of knowing divine truth, right? Because they are not blocked by the emotional process. Yeah. And it's not a competition. They're just younger than you or got different blocks than you, or they have a more powerfully developed will than you. And all you need to do is allow those things to develop and it will happen for you too. It's not a competition, but it is something you can measure your own progress, isn't it? You can, if today's better than yesterday type of thing. All right, was there any questions about that before we have a quick break and then our final Q&A? Paul, you would like to ask?
Back at the 2014 assistance group about building the will muscle.
Yep.
So this is relating specifically to that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, remember, I think it was Mary who presented that talk, building the will muscle. And if you think about that talk, it was all about developing aspiration, developing desire. So go back to some of that material and have another look at it and think about, okay, I've got to develop a desire to feel emotion here. So how do I do that? What exercise do I need to engage using my will rather than willpower? And also what blockages do I need to release to begin me on that path? So for many of you, your false beliefs about emotions are prevalent in every discussion we have. You need to let them go. You need to choose to let these false beliefs go. You want to believe them because they stop you from making choices and decisions and taking action. So choose to let them go, these false beliefs. Now, you've been told they're false over and over again. That hasn't changed you. So you obviously believe they're true. So let yourself believe they're true. Experiment with whether they're true or not. Does that make sense? Rather than just believing what I tell you. You're going to need to take some action to experiment with what your current beliefs are, rather than just forcing yourself to believe something that you don't really believe. That make sense? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's have a break now for 10 minutes, shall we? Come back at 5 to 4. Is that right?